We hope you enjoy this podcast. All our conversations are inspired by films we have selected to appear on SDG.vision. So go and take a look and be inspired by people and organizations who are making valuable contributions to the Sustainable Development Goals and making our world a better place for everybody to live. Now, sit back, enjoy, be inspired, and afterwards, go and take action.
Well, hello to Sandy Bishop, who's the Chief Executive of the Lopez Community Land Trust. Hello, Sandy.
Hello, Pierre. Thank you for this invitation today. Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure, and we really appreciate you being with us. We wanted to get you on the SDG Vision podcast because we had a film of yours, of Lopez Community Land Trust, called Lopez Community Land Trust, a cooperative for affordable housing and empowerment, which is a terrific film. And we'll show that. We've got it on the channel at the moment, but just for ease, we'll put it at the end of this podcast conversation so people can have a look at it there. And we've got it under SDG 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities, and people will find out why we've got that under that SDG. You hit others as well, and we'll come on to that, other SDGs. But first of all, Sandy, perhaps I know where you are, but our viewers probably don't. So can you tell us, where is Lopez Island and what's it like to live there?
Okay, so Lopez Island is located in the state of Washington. We are close to the border with British Columbia, Canada. So, and we are in the northwest of the United States. We're in an area surrounded by the Salish Sea. Lopez is one of 4 of the ferry-served islands. There are hundreds of islands. Some of them disappear, at high tide, come back at low tide. But more than a dozen are livable. It's just 4 are served through the ferry service. So basically, Northwest Washington State in the United States, next to the border of British Columbia, Canada.
Am I right in saying it's not that far from Seattle, or?
It's actually a lifetime. It's a lifetime and a world away from Seattle. Very, very different. But in terms of being accessible, it's, depending on traffic, an hour and 50 minutes by road, and then about a 45-minute ferry ride. So we are in the vicinity of Seattle, but like I said, a world away.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm absolutely sure. And what is that world like? Is it a rural idyll, or?
Okay, so Lopez Island, it's home to the Coast Salish before, late 1800s, when all the white folks started coming in and settling the lands. It was primarily, probably up to about 50 years ago, forestry, fishing, very extractive from the land. Now it is considered to be a place where second, third, fourth homes are. About 42% of the homes are occupied just part-time. And it, has a couple of grocery stores, a couple of gas stations. It's ferry served. So, if you live here full time, you can expect long waits in the summer to get off island or to get on island. There's approximately 3,200 people that live here year round. That population explodes in the summertime. We are probably an 88% Caucasian population. The second largest population is Hispanic. And like I said, original home of Coast Salish tribes. What else can I tell you about Lopez Island? 3,200 people, about 60% full-time occupied. It has a school, has a, preschool, and then K through 12, which has about 200 children in it. We have quite a high population that qualify for reduced fees or free lunch. There is a great wealth disparity on Lopez Island. Wages are not as low as they are on the mainland, right? But they're not high enough to be able to afford the rents or purchase price. The median home price of a home, I think, in 2024 was somewhere around $850,000 a year. You would probably have to earn 3 times the average wage in order to afford that. The year before, in 2023, it was around $1 million. So anyway, there's some disparity. But that all said, Lopez is somewhat unique in that we have quite a active, engaged community that really looks out for each other. Regardless of where you are in the circle of wealth, even though we have that disparity, we oftentimes come together. It's not so much how much you have, it's how much you are willing to give to the community, and that is across the board. I think it doesn't really matter where you are on that scale. There are lots and lots of people for whom community is first. And that's where they like to give their time and energy and effort. And so, we have probably about 44 nonprofits active on Lopez Island, if you can imagine. We are an unincorporated area, so we're considered rural, but, on average, we have about 1 house per 4 acres. So we're in that between rural and what would be considered suburban in terms of our density. And for as long as I can remember, I've lived on the island for about 45, 46 years. And for as long as I can remember, for the last 30 years, accessibility to housing has been troublesome. When I first got here, there were so many rentals. $25 a month, $50 a month, free, whatever. But like I said, it was less attractive to live here. After we got high-speed internet, our population really expanded because people could have access to their devices. And then COVID came along, and people found, that combination of needing to work from home or being allowed to work from home plus high-speed internet led them to, to want to live here full-time as opposed to just coming part-time. So I hope I've given you a little bit of a understanding. It's quite the natural beauty here is breathtaking, You can see both the Cascades and the Olympic ranges. The Salish Sea surrounds us. Almost no matter where you live on the island, you're surrounded by beauty. And a lot of people say they come here to the island because it is so beautiful, but they stay because of the community spirit. Yeah.
That's very interesting. Now, you've alluded to a few things, I think, which is going to answer this question, but perhaps you can fill in the details. I was going to ask when and why the Lopez Community Land Trust was formed, and you've alluded to the fact that 40% of homes are second homes. And I believe when you set up, there was a considerable problem about affordability. Is that right, in terms of owning or renting?
Yeah, and so in the late 80s, that interesting phenomena of the internet came into all of our lives. And so lands here in the islands started being sold sight unseen via the internet. And so we found, and people would look at how absolutely stunning it was here. And they would think, how could this be? Land like that for such an inexpensive price. So they would purchase it. But what happened is the prices in 1989 rose 190% in that year. And so a group of us, there were probably 40 or 50 of us who were living on the island, and we thought, if we don't do something to stop this, and understanding we could not stop it, but to slow the pace and, put something in place that allows us to take a different path, we are essentially, all of us, going to be priced out of this. So we did a lot of research. And that's when we discovered the Community Land Trust model, which is a model where you hold land in trust for community purposes. Affordable housing, which is permanently affordable, so it cannot, enter on. It is removed from speculation, and then it cannot go back onto the speculative market. Not after 30 years, not after 40, not after 50, right? It's 198 years affordable. So anyway, we looked at a lot of models, and when we discovered Community Land Trust model, we thought, well, that's what we need, because market forces can hit small communities with the force of a freight train, and it's almost unstoppable once it happens to you. So by interrupting that and starting to raise funds and purchase properties and creating these small neighborhoods of co-ops for folks that were living and working here, we found we could, have some semblance of balance on the island. But that's essentially why we started, that 190% rise in 1 year alone, and this new phenomena of selling land sight unseen through the internet was enough to warrant, action on our part. We just could see, right? That Chinese proverb, if you don't change the direction you're headed, you're going to end up where you're going. Well, we looked at that and we thought, where we're going is probably not beneficial to the community as a whole,
And can you imagine what the island would have looked like if you hadn't have made that intervention back in the 80s?
Yeah, we have some inklings of that, right? By looking at some of the neighboring communities and what's happening. So we all just feel deep gratitude to each other and all those that came before us, that put, the Community Land Trust structure together so that it was viable for communities like us to use it as a tool. Right, because it's hard. It's really hard to know how to disrupt the market in a beautiful place. Yeah,
absolutely. And I really, it's very thought provoking when you say you take land out of sort of speculation, and then you think, well, surely land shouldn't be something. We all live on the land on this planet. Why should it be there used as a speculative, financial device? It's quite shocking when you hear it, really.
But capitalism. Everything has a price, and on an island, the more scarce it is, the more valuable it becomes. Right? Economics 101. Always create scarcity, and then you can drive the costs. Well, in this case, the island is what it is. Climate will affect it a little bit, and we'll start losing some, around the shoreline. But these are just small little islands, and so the land is, you cannot go further west. You can't, it is what it is, and yeah.
Absolutely ripe for the plucking for these speculators, I imagine. So, well, that's wonderful that you took it out of that equation. That's fantastic. Must have taken a huge amount of work, I imagine. And a lot of genning up, a lot of researching. Was the land trust model used much in the States at that point? Or?
We were, so there's Lopez Community Land Trust and then Opal, which is a neighboring island, Orcas Island. The two of us, we were inspired by somebody by the name of Peter Fisher, who had been on the East Coast. And he told us about Vermont, the Housing and Land Conservation Board, and they were using this model. And he also told us about consultants that were involved with the Institute for Community Economics. So we were the first on the West Coast to establish ourselves as community land trusts. But now I think there's over 30 community land trusts in the state of Washington. We have, yesterday we met with a group of 5 community land trusts just in the islands. We have 5 different ones. You might ask why we don't have one, but these islands, we don't mean to balkanize ourselves, but we're all quite different, and it's hard to interact ferry to ferry. And you have to know, I think, in order to do good community development, you really have to have an intimate knowledge of your community. So we trade a lot of information, we share information, we're quite open source with each other, but we all have our designated areas in which we have our community land trust operating. And that's quite unique.
Almost like a federation, I suppose.
Yeah.
Federation. Yeah, that's lovely. Makes absolute sense. I think that there is a beauty in keeping it small sometimes for the reasons that you've just mentioned in terms of community and knowing each other and the local issues, etc. I wanted to ask Sandy about the housing cooperative model that you use, without going into too much detail because we probably don't have time. But is that part buy, part rent, or is it? How does it work?
Yeah, so housing cooperatives are interesting, and it's I don't know if at any rate, housing cooperatives were really starting to kick off in the United States in the 1920s. And if you look at a map of the United States, you could see that they were primarily started where workers were organizing for higher wages, an 8-hour workday and all of that. And they were pooling their money or purchasing buildings, and the co-op would own the land and the building and then make it available in their neighborhood for folks who were working together. And not that that's always the way it happened, but that was a great, many of co-ops got started that way. But the Community Land Trust cooperative model is, I think, quite brilliant in that the land is held separate by a community land trust, and it's held in trust, and then the co-op is owned and operated by those folks living there. So as the co-op members age out or, think, gosh, the market is so good, let's sell our co-op off, which primarily happened from the 1920s until, now, almost all those co-ops have disappeared because it was too attractive, right, as you're aging to hold on to something like that. But at any rate, let me just tell you, by having a cooperative housing owned and operated by the tenants, right, and then the land held in trust, you strengthen, right, the permanent affordability because you've got this relationship. You're looking out. The tenants are organized, they are self-managing, self-governing, and the land trust is there to say this will be forever, affordable. And so there's a good, strong partnership. But the reason we got involved in doing cooperatives as opposed to doing fee simple ownership on community land trust land is that we were looking for lenders, 30-year mortgage money, right? And the banks, all of the banks, told us there's no way they could ever lend to the population that we were serving. So we said, I wonder what we'll do. One of the vice presidents of the banks that we were dealing with, she said, I think you should form cooperatives, housing cooperatives. That way, the bank lends to the co-op and not the individuals because you're serving rural people who are not bankable. So that's how we got involved in housing co-ops. And, I'm forever grateful to her for saying that because turned out to be a really good model. There's not I think a lot of people, they're offered either ownership or rental. Rentals, you have, right, the landlord-tenant relationship, which can sometimes be good and sometimes not. Ownership can sometimes be too great of a leap, for some people, just holding, all of that on your own. And then a co-op, right, is a hybrid between the two. So you've got a limited amount of equity that you're building annually, year in, year out. You know that your rent is stable because you are self-governing and you know what your expenses are going to be. And you know that when it comes time to repairs, it is spelled out what repairs belong to the cooperative and what repairs belong to the member. And so it is a way of stabilizing, housing, which is so essential to people's health and well-being, is to have access to stable housing. And so this hybrid model, it really adds one more layer of stabilization. That said, it also holds people accountable because you have to be accountable to yourself, your own household, but you also have to be accountable to your neighbors because you are both a neighbor and a business. You have a business relationship and a neighborly relationship, and you have to balance those. So watch what you say, right? Because you're both in business and a neighbor, but also, you're holding yourself accountable and your neighbors are holding you accountable for making sure that you are participating in the business of the co-op. Not perfect, but at any rate, it works, and we've been doing this for 35 years. We're building our 7th neighborhood, and the more co-ops that we do, they exchange information with each other, best practices. They can, if they run into, issues, it's good to have somebody else to talk it out. How did you deal with that, etc. So we find that on a small island, having cooperative housing, which may be difficult to do in an urban area if you're just trying to do a one-off, we find that by doing it multiple times and building that knowledge and that cultural identity around how you manage your own housing, it is very, very helpful and further stabilizing for people.
And how many units of housing are there within the co-op at the moment?
I think there's, with this next neighborhood, roughly around 60, something like that.
Okay, that's sizable, isn't it? And I love that, what you said, it's an economic process, of course, but it's a social process as well. And I think that's a really good blend, isn't it? And I imagine, sorry.
Well, I was going to say, we live in a democracy. The United States of America still is a democracy. And yet we don't have a very participatory population, generally speaking. And I always tell people, if you want to be really a good citizen, right, that is invested, and it's a kind of a civic duty to pay attention, to vote, and learn how to behave as a democratic citizen. And I think by doing it so close to home, it really helps people to understand. I often tell them, it's interesting. You all think that, you're not maybe as skilled as some in dealing with your cooperative business or whatever. But when I watch them in public meetings or elsewhere, I can just see how skilled they have all become because they have to participate with a different level, of listening to each other, of strategizing, of thinking, strategically about things, being, a critical thinker about certain things, because you are trying to balance, the economics and the sense of home. You have to balance all of that all the time. And I think that it gives people, they're not only more empowered, but I think that they have, they develop some sense of belonging, right, in a civic society that they might not have otherwise. not to put, too much of a romantic spin on all of it, but very practically speaking, I think that's, what I've observed.
It's interesting, and of course, we mustn't rose-tinted glasses and all that. Wherever there's people, there's going to be fallings out. There's going to be. However, you have a history, and I'm sure that you've seen it many, many times before, and I'm sure there's new things that occur, and you're experienced. And
yeah.
But it struck me when you said that perhaps the primary thing about Lopez Island is the community, and I imagine. It's interesting, isn't it, when you said that, United States citizens generally they don't participate much in their democracy, in their local democracy. And often it is because of a sense of alienation, really, in the sense that they don't feel part of a community. And community is so powerful, isn't it? And it feels to me as if that's this process you're engaged with is as much about community building as it is about affordable housing.
Yeah, I think they go hand in hand. So we also do something called sweat equity, which you probably are familiar with, right? Where during the building process, people put in a certain amount of hours, and then later that translates into a dollar amount, which later translates into their equity when they sell their share in the co-op, right? Mm-hmm. So that's how it works. But also, early on we learned that by having sweat equity, you don't hand somebody a key to a house and say, good luck. I know you don't have as much money as others, and good luck keeping everything up because you probably can't afford to hire people to take care of your house. But anyway, what sweat equity does is it introduces people, from the time you start clearing the land until the time you start doing landscaping, right? They are involved in all of it. So even if they are not very proficient in all the building trades, they know enough, they've seen enough, they are introduced to tools, they have a much better sense of how their house is actually built, what all the construction methodologies are. And what we found is they are better equipped to take care of it. If they don't know something, maybe one of their neighbors knows something. They also all are familiar with tools, right, to do little things. So you see something and you think, well, I can do that. I can take care of that. Don't need to wait until it all falls apart to hire somebody to do a full repair. I can just start to maintain things. And we've seen that over and over, across the decades, that the houses are fairly well maintained and holding up. And so in addition to the sweat equity, we make a choice to spend money on good materials so that we know that they can withstand the test of time. So that combination of inviting the people who are going to live there to help build and purchasing, larger or, materials that have a long life, and then building smaller rather than larger. It all is part of a formula that is going to help people not just maintain, their house, but to be able to afford, right, to live in their houses. It's easier to heat, it's easier to clean, it's easier, just to take care of all of those things if it's small, well built, and you've had a hand in constructing it along with your neighbors.
And it's a tremendous sense of ownership as well, of achievement, that you've contributed literally your sweat to building your own house, which is a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Are there many meetings at all? Do you have regular meetings, housing co-op meetings?
They are typically what happens. Some of them meet quarterly. I think when they first start up, they probably meet monthly. And then I've noticed over the years, some will just meet annually. They always have to do a budget together. They they do walkarounds, discuss repairs, that type of thing. But I think many of them, when they start up, they have more regular meetings. After they get going, they have fewer meetings. Some communities have stronger sense of community. They will do things like not have a meeting, but just get together, share a meal or something. It helps to not always have everything revolve around business. So, all of them are a little different. Some of them have had real rocky relations for a while. It has been one member, will cause a lot of stress. And that takes years sometimes to unravel. In those cases, the land trust does, we don't have a parent, relationship with them or a landlord relationship with them. But the documents can be kind of complex sometimes. So sometimes if something is going on and they find themselves in a quandary, we do try to advise, we do try and connect them with somebody, a good attorney. We try and, buffer some of that because again, this is their home and it's very important to them and it can't be in a constant state of upheaval because of someone's mental health or, something else happening. So the land trust does try just to buffer some of that. We can't take care of it for them. That's not our relationship. But I find by just being there, supporting, guiding, steering, it can alleviate a lot of stress. And that's another reason why I like the Community Land Trust co-op relationship and not just have a cooperative on its own. I think that anybody that's ever owned a business or, done anything with a group of people, you have to be able to have somebody outside of that group that you can rely on and trust to help get over some of the rockiest times.
I think that's important, and we all know that we've all had neighbours from hell. We've all had, communities are not always just happy going. Everyone's like-minded, etc., etc. But I was going to ask whether or not, because it's all about, community development is all about process, isn't it? Really, and the right processes. And I was wondering whether or not you've seen, you've mentioned people speaking up in meetings, getting more confident. Have you seen a change? Well, the process sort of changing people necessarily, but enriching people's characters and changing the way they see themselves and the way they relate to others.
Oh, very, very much so. Yeah, sometimes I see it because I see them interacting more on a public, in a public meeting space. But sometimes I've seen it in, there's a lot of small business development that happens. And I've seen them be a little bit more bold in what they do. They have more confidence. And so I see that their business sense has been strengthened. They've made some choices they wouldn't necessarily have made. Now, some of that is just because they've got stable housing and they know now they can just dedicate their, more time and take a little more risk with their business because they don't have to worry about their housing. So I've seen that. I've also seen, people, they finish building a house. One of the park rangers just told me this. She's like, "Oh my God, now everybody wants me to always do things, at the park because I'm so skilled with all the tools, and so it opens up more, at work." Or I've seen them go to a friend's house, and help somebody do some repairs on their house. Anyway, it happens, I think, at different levels for different people. I've seen it, early childhood educators, after they establish their house and that they go on and decide, okay, I've got stable housing. Now I can actually go for a higher degree. anyway, you just start to see the spinoffs. When we first started, we didn't really understand how important stable housing was as an economic driver in people's lives. But now that we've seen it and we see the number of people who do start up small businesses and sustain them, it's been incredible to watch. There's probably 30% of all the folks living there start a business, maintain a business, and are successful at it. And in part, it's the skills that they've learned, and it is confidence building. And I think we all know what confidence can do, right? You can stand a little stronger, be a little bolder, because you have already done something really, really difficult, and you not only survived it, right, but people have given you like lots of kudos for the fine work that you've done, and you're living in it. So it's a daily reminder of what you're capable of. Yeah.
It's a terrific model. And I wonder, are there any other, apart from the housing cooperative, are there other initiatives that the Lopez Community Land Trust is engaged with?
So we have two primary programs, right? One is affordable housing, and the other is sustainable agriculture and rural development. And under sustainable agriculture and rural development, we do a number of things. The sustainable agriculture, we, publish a farm product guide, which we've done for the last 30 years or so. We helped with some other community members and a local farm establish a farm to school program, which is still operating today. Now the school primarily operates it. We hold about 108 acres of land in trust specifically for local food production and increasing our, local food system. There's some small business development, where we just lease land for, say, a stonemason. There's also a local bakery where we just own the land and they operate the bakery. We have an electric car share that is shared among the folks, and we put in some electric car chargers. We've done quite a lot of rainwater catchment and solar photovoltaics, for energy production. Sustainable ag and rural development is sort of all-encompassing, but the main thing we do is hold land in trust for community purposes, right? There's a endangered island marble butterfly, so we have a little plot of land for that. We're, trying to create more pollinator plots in the islands. Yeah, things like that. They're land-based and community-centered. We're different than a conservation land trust, right? Because ours are community centered a lot. And one thing, back to 1989 that we all said to ourselves is if we don't somehow control some of the land that is outside of the speculative market, everything will be for sale and we will forever be being disrupted by market forces. Some people have a lot of fun playing in the market and, disrupting lives, etc. Other people, they have no interest in it. They just want to live. They want to give back to their community. They want to steward some land. They want to be very, very hyper local, in how they live their lives. And those people also deserve, right, a place to be. So that's sort of the underpinnings, of what we do with a community land trust. And it's happening all over, right? It's happening in the UK and in lots of different places. Yeah.
I think it's a model that is it allows for entrepreneurship as well as that social and common good.
Yes.
So it's a lovely blend, I think. of things. And you've mentioned that you are aware of sort of ecology, and I've read on your website that you are working towards net zero as a target. How's that going, and what does that look like? You've mentioned a few things so far.
Yeah, so we were we established ourselves in 1989. We always built, smaller footprint, utilizing, good materials. But we read something by Bill McDonough, who is an architect, but he really put out a challenge, how do we love all of the children of all of the species for all times, and what are our actions today doing to secure life, beyond our generation. So we looked at all of that, and then we decided, with climate change being at such a crisis point in 2007, but not, it didn't seem like people were doing very much about it. And single-family residential building practices contributing to that. How can we establish ourselves and pull back from contributing towards that crisis? And so that's when we started looking at net zero. And I must say, we did a lot in that first project. And by being bold in our plans, we definitely got a lot of support to do it, and we pulled it off, right? And we did 11 houses, all net zero capable, and probably about 30% of the families are able to live that way. But just because you build a net zero capable house doesn't mean a family is going to engage in it in a way that it will maintain net zero. So we learned that, in the Northwest where we live, through passive measures, you can reduce your energy by passive measures, just 40%. And so we did everything passively we could first, and then we started introducing technology. Some of the technology we introduced requires more maintenance than I think people are ready for, such as some of the solar hot water systems. And so we make changes along the way, but we are still highly committed to making net zero capable housing. And the technologies, even in terms of building methodologies, have come a long way since 2007, 2008. And so we just continue to learn and grow, and we try and be very cognizant of the fact that not everyone is at all interested in maintaining components of a house. Most people just want to live there. So you should try and be as passive as possible in what you offer people in getting to net zero.
Passive as possible in terms of rather saying, right, you need to do this and adopt this and use this solar heater, but it's saying, look, these are here and these are the benefits. And
well, and also by passive, I do mean architecturally and design speaking, right? You know where to place your south windows. You know not to make a very deep house. Try and keep your footprint to about 22 feet, so that when that winter sun comes in, it can always hit properly. People can pick up as much passive rays as they want. The way that the venting works, having opening windows so you can do passive cooling, making sure that you always have a high window and a low window so you get a nice breeze through. So I'm talking more about passive in terms of they don't really have to interact with it. The way that it's been designed can always utilize what the natural world is there to give in terms of heat and cooling, that kind of thing.
Are you involved at all? I know that you said there were 2 schools on the island. Are you engaged with them in terms of any programs, any community work or educational work that you do, or with other communities perhaps off the island?
Yeah, we do a lot of that. A lot of people reach out to us. Like I said, we're part of a community land trust movement. We're mostly open source. So sometimes, depending on who's teaching at the local school here, they will ask if they can invite some kids in. Maybe we do a building project together. Maybe we just explain to them about some of the technologies, something like that. Let's see, there are a lot of groups that come by. So all they want to do is they want to experience it. They want to walk through, they want to see things, they want to talk about it, because there's something about being in a place where it is all there. It helps people to envision what they can do in their community. It makes it a little more realistic. So yeah, we do a lot of involvement with other groups, individuals, schools, yeah, that kind of thing.
We're a channel devoted primarily to the Sustainable Development Goals, and we see that as a really useful framework for people and organizations to use. The Sustainable Development Goals, that's a United Nations initiative.
Oh, yeah.
As we said, your film we placed under Sustainable Cities and Communities. But there's 17 Sustainable Development Goals, from no poverty to life underwater, to basically a way encouraging people and organizations and governments to work more sustainably, really, for a sustainable planet for people and other creatures and animals that live on this planet. And I wondered whether or not the Land Trust has referred to that in the past, is aware of it, or
we have.
Is it something? Oh, good. I was going to say that some don't. Some organisations have never heard of it, and that's part of the reason why we're here.
No, we have heard of it, and you probably recognize the acronym SARD, Sustainable Ag and Rural Development, that came out of a UN program, right? Yes. Right. So quite aware of it. I think those are our lofty goals and all, and we use some of those as inspiration, and then we just get to work locally. We pull from a lot of sources, but I'll tell you what, we do take some comfort in knowing that there is a global community of people, and people certainly much smarter and capable than I am, who are putting forth some of these things. I mean, lots of kudos to everybody doing it in, much larger scale than we are, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think I can speak for the SDG Vision community. We think that the bottom-up approach is really, really important, for the reasons that you've spelt out throughout this conversation. Sometimes large structures can ignore, we talked about process and the little steps in the process that if you take them away, weaken the whole, and so I think that, the reason we were so thrilled to have you on is because we think that you play an important role in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals. You show very practically how people and communities can contribute towards them. Often they're seen as at governmental level, which is important. But I think just as important is the community level. And, we've got SDG 17 is partnership for the goals, and you've talked about partnership throughout this, throughout this conversation. I was wondering whether there's any advice you would give if there's communities looking at this, maybe in the States, maybe not in the States. And this is why perhaps I would be asking not for necessarily technical advice, but any advice that you could give if people or communities or organizations are looking to start something similar up. What would you say?
Well, you got to begin. right? That is the first thing. You really, really have to start. And I always tell people, you know, land matters, but if you don't have a strong legal protection for your organization and the way you're holding land, you will leave yourself and others that come after you extremely vulnerable. And I learned that early on from a very good real estate attorney who does, a lot of high-end clients, and that's who he looks after. But anyway, he gave us his time pro bono. And one thing he told me is that if you're serious about this, you need to protect yourself, both in the United States constitutional law and the laws of the state of Washington, and make sure that your documents can stand the test of time, because once you have land, you have something valuable that others, unscrupulous, as they can be, will want to take from you. So protect yourself. So I always want to tell people that. Don't try and think that, we live in such a nice world and we're going to do this happy thing. We've seen, people, communities everywhere, they lose something that's really valuable to them. So land is important, but how you hold the land and the documents under which, you file to keep that land. And then make all your governing documents clear, right? You don't want to be loosey-goosey about how land can be sold. You want to be real clear about who has the power to ever sell land. It becomes very attractive to sell land sometimes, so make sure of that. Form alliances so that you're never just isolated in what you're doing. But again, the first thing to do always, begin. Because if you do not begin, you can't get to second, third, fourth, fifth step ever. And then, form all your allies. People often say, well, gosh, how do you find, a good accountant, a good attorney, and good at that? And I always tell people, go to the most successful firms, the most, highly renowned attorneys, financial people, everyone, and ask around for someone who is already successful to offer their time to you. Because typically, if you go out there, the people who give their time away a lot, they always have so much more to do. So we got to invite new people in to helping us build this world that we would like built. They give all their time to building a world that I think is counterproductive to many of us. It helps people where wealth is concentrated, higher and higher to the fewer and fewer. But there are lots of people working in those environments, and they want to be involved. They just don't really have avenues to be involved. So give people opportunity to be involved and really help you set your organization up on a really strong foundation. Once you do that, you've got your strong foundation, invite more and more of the community in, but try not to get ahead of yourself and do too much. If you don't have a good foundation and really clear documents for governance, you invite a lot of humans in, there will just be a big old mess, because that's what people do. They misinterpret, they don't know, things aren't clear, there's power tripping, there's all of those kinds of things, so just, be respectful of the process. And the world we live in, is very much governed through laws at this point anyway. We still have laws and courts and all of that, so take advantage of it and use those protections in the work that you do. And above all else, we are community land trusts, so community land and lots of trust, in yourself and your relations and everything. Those are 3 key components. Yeah.
And never lose sight of that. Yeah.
Never lose sight of that. No, because they will always serve you. Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic practical advice. Sorry, Sandy, you were going to say.
No. I was just going to say, real estate development, which is basically we're all involved in, is really complicated, and you don't often see it successfully implemented on a community level. And I think that's because a lot of times people want to do things like this, but they don't have the skill set, and they forget to reach out and invite people not to take over, right? But invite people that are highly skilled to come into their vision and lend their skills to help build that part of the vision. You don't want to give your power over. You want to maintain your power, but you have to allow these people to come in and help you, build this kind of an environment. It's very, very complex, and they know so much after, successfully building their own businesses, enterprises, whatever.
And I imagine at first that it's a question of confidence, isn't it, really, to invite those people in, because you could equally fear those people, see them as perhaps invasive and looking for their own benefit. But that's why it's so important to have this conversation with you, because you've been through it, Lopez Community Land Trust, and I think it's sage advice to actually not be too frightened. There are people out there in the other economy that want to help and have the skills to help, because, as you say, you're operating within a system that is not necessarily always friendly to you. Sandy, it's been fantastic. We could talk for hours, I know, but I know that you rushed here from a series of meetings with other communities, and we're just very grateful for the time that you've given us. And we know that this conversation will lead to some practical action across the world, I hope. And that's where the local is so important, I think, that it can be global. And just want to thank you very much and wish you and all on Lopez Island all the best for 2025 and the future.
Yeah, well, thank you, Pierre. I really appreciate you reaching out to me and having this conversation. It's been really great. And thank you for all your work, too.
Thank you. That's lovely to hear. Thank you, Sandy. Goodbye now.
Okay, bye-bye.
Wall Street Journal said this was the place to live. It was just a cool spot. Housing just started going through the roof here. So, wow, those of us who worked for wages were like, whoa, we're not going to be able to stay here because everything just shot up so fast. So we looked around for models on how we could keep land forever affordable for the working people. And so we looked at the Community Land Trust model, and it seemed very empowering. Its roots are in civil rights and the Gandhian land reform movement. And we thought, well, yeah, this is a good model. And as we tried to get ourselves oriented, none of our people really qualified for a bank loan. We were working with this woman, and she said, why don't you form a cooperative? Instead of everybody qualifying for a bank loan, a cooperative qualifies for a bank loan. And we've just continued to do cooperatives because it helped people really feel empowered. The Community Land Trust isn't a landlord. It's or a parent. These community cooperatives, they all have their own officers. They do all their finances. So it's worked really well. Through this whole process of being empowered in their cooperative, a lot of them have gone on to either run for public office or to serve on county committees, citizen committees. It's kind of a basic lesson in democracy. The biggest thing that we discovered, and we didn't anticipate this, is it's changed the community as a whole. So these cooperatives became an economic engine for economic development in the entire community. So because these people don't pay much for their homes, rents and mortgages are so low, so they can invest in other things in their lives, whether it's community volunteerism or their own business. And at one point we think we had a major role in 16 businesses. So that's been really amazing to see how it's actually helped the economic development of the entire island.
Something that's really significant is that we're pairing both the community land trust model with the cooperative model. So as a community land trust, we own land as a nonprofit for several different purposes. One of them is affordable housing. We also can hold land in trust for sustainable agriculture, forestry, and cooperatives or cottage industries. And so we couple holding the land in trust with leasing it to the housing cooperative. So the housing cooperative then will own all of the improvements on the land. So they'll own all of the houses that are built. And so that separates those costs out, which makes it a lot more affordable. Those two together is part of what makes this work so well and ensures that it'll last for a really long time. When you are purchased like a share to be part of the cooperative, your membership includes your house. For new cooperatives or ones that are being built or getting started, that's where we'll have the sweat equity component, where the homeowner, they'll help build their own home and help build their neighbor's home also, all working together and with construction interns and with volunteers to be able to be building the house to live in.
And there's nobody who can't do their sweat equity. No one. We had one woman, all she did was haul rocks off the site in a little wagon. And we had 3 grandmothers who just shingled up to the height where they didn't have to get on a ladder. And pregnant mom ordered the furniture, which is a nightmare. She earned every penny of her sweat equity that way. So there's just nothing that can't be done by a prospective homeowner. Once we got to Common Ground, which is the largest cooperative here, we made that commitment to net zero. And what that means then is our homeowners are learning about what it means to live net zero as we're entering this incredible change of our lives through the climate. It's helpful not only in the pocketbook, but you feel a part of the change that's happening. We're actually internationally sought after as advice. I do think there's a huge future for cooperatives, more than there have ever been before. I think young people are looking at new models